Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast, where we explore the theory and practice of design. Hosted by me, Dani, and
me, Peter.
Hey, Peter.
Hi, Dani. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Yes, it's great to see you.
Great to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
What are we talking about today?
Speaking of welcoming back, Dani, today we're talking about the power of the pause, why taking a break matters.
Such a timely topic as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to having a chat about it, exploring more of the pause. I should probably get out of the way straight away that going through my mind is the old joke about the polar bear walking into the bar.
I've
Do I
heard
need to?
that before.
All right.
Is this a Scottish joke?
It might be, and even as I'm saying it, I'm probably going to mess it up. But it goes something along the lines of a polar bear walks into a bar, and the barman says, "Oh, how can I help you?" And the polar bear says, "Can I have a pint, please?" And the barman says, "Why the big pause?" Danny's laughing silently, everybody. Anyway, now that we've got that out of the way.
All right, I'm glad that is out of your system. Does
Me
that
too.
qualify as a dad joke?
Me too. Yeah, definitely. It's not quite right, and it was terribly told, and might only be amusing to a certain subsection of our listeners.
This is why Peter is in design and
Hmm.
not comedy.
Okay, I'll take that as feedback. So obviously, that's like different definition of pause there. Shall we get into what we mean
Let's
by
get into it.
pause? Get
Yep.
into it. Okay.
So we usually start with a definition.
A definition, yeah, pause, Pause, just for avoidance of doubt. So our good old definition I've looked up as a verb, pause, apparently can be defined as interrupting action or speech briefly, or to temporarily interrupt the operation of a process or device. Similarly, as a noun, actually, is a temporary stop in action or speech. That looks like the definition. And yeah, ultimately comes from Greek, from pausis, which came from pausin, and it meant to stop. So it went from Greek to Latin, Old French, Middle English, but originated with the Greek for to stop. There you go. So pausing is stopping briefly, temporarily.
It's the temporarily or briefly that we can dive into. If we agree that pause means to stop, the timing of the pause or the length of the pause, rather, there's importance in that and different applications of that. How long do we pause for?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I know a little slip of the tongue there, the timing. I think it's the time, the duration, and also the timing, as in when it happens. I think those are two really important parts of an effective pause.
When I talk about pausing, there's
Mm.
three that I talk about: micro, mini,
Mm-hmm.
mighty. So micro pauses could be just a few seconds to reset, or you start talking and then you're like, hang on,
Mm-hmm.
what's about to come out of my mouth is not going to help. And this is where just pausing, taking a breath, and then going back to it. That is
Mm-hmm.
literally a micro pause.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me, because I tend to be one of those people that I've been described as not having a filter.
Okay.
So I've had to really learn how to micro pause, because sometimes not having a filter is not helpful in every situation. Sometimes you just got to say what needs to be said, but
Yeah.
that's not always helpful.
Yeah.
So that's what a micro pause looks like.
Okay. So micro is a few seconds. What about like mini? How long is a mini pause?
So a mini pause can be something like, I'm just going to walk away for 10 minutes and go have a walk, clear my head,
Mm-hmm.
and come back. It could
Mm-hmm.
be, I'm going to go make myself a coffee.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to define a duration, it's probably somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes that you're walking away from something. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
a micro pause is me literally just pausing in the moment. I'm not moving, I'm not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a mini pause is going, I'll be right back. I need to go take a walk. I need a break. So it's longer in time, but it often requires some sort of movement on your
Hmm.
part.
Hmm.
It may not. It may be that you stay exactly where you are, but generally a mini pause is used when you need a change in environment.
Hmm. Okay.
Mm.
Yep.
And then the mighty pause, that is, these are things like taking a day off,
Hmm.
a longer holiday. This is truly a break from something that lasts a day or more.
Okay. Mini, micro, and mighty. Yeah, I can relate to all three of those. I to share with the listeners, I have just come back from a mighty pause. I had a holiday for a few weeks from work and went overseas. Yeah, that was not surprisingly a big refresh, time to recharge and focus. And yeah, the mini and the micro I can relate to as well. The mini, I quite often, when I've got a big chunk of work to do, I'll use the Pomodoro technique. Have you heard of the Pomodoro technique, Danny?
Yep.
So I find that really useful to break things down into small chunks and also break time down into small chunks. And
Mm.
I kind of stick to the original way I learned the Pomodoro technique is to take what you're doing and break it down into 30-minute chunks of time. And those 30 minutes, you set a timer for 25 minutes and do as much work as you can in that 25 minutes. And then when the timer goes off, you take a 5-minute break and do something different. Like you're saying, actually get up and walk around or change your environment temporarily and then come back and then start your next 25-minute chunk. So I find that really, really helpful to get focused and to give short deadlines. And there is something kind of magical about not just having the break, but knowing the break is coming up and that it keeps you
Mm.
really focused on time. And sometimes you really look forward to the 5-minute break, and sometimes you get really frustrated by the kind of artificial imposition of that pause. But whichever, it's always helpful. And the micro break, something I've learned only in the last 6 months actually, is this idea of when you're learning something, taking frequent, kind of random 10-second breaks where you might be learning something, whether it's on a YouTube video or reading something, and by closing your eyes and for 10 seconds and doing your best to think of nothing, maybe focus on your breath. Apparently, what it does is it mimics some of the things that our brains do when you're sleeping, and helps with knowledge consolidation. I can see Dani now nodding along here like she knows all about this. But yeah, that was a revelation to me. Like I've taken micro breaks in the past, maybe just like looking up from a screen to look out of a window to give your eyes a rest, but I hadn't come across this trick of kind of brain resting, micro resting.
I refrain from calling it a trick because it's probably more of a hack, but then what's the difference between a trick
Oh,
and
yeah,
a hack?
trick and
The
hack.
reason
Yeah,
I don't like to use that
yeah,
language is it is very science based.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
And the thing is that when the idea behind that, let's say you're studying something and
Hmm.
you read a couple of paragraphs and then you close your eyes and just focus on your breath,
Hmm.
it's giving your brain time to process and embed what you're learning. This is also why sleep is important
Hmm.
because that's when your brain does the things that,
Hmm.
because you have to understand, in addition to right now, we're recording this podcast, which our brain is very engaged in.
Hmm.
It's also working on making sure we're both breathing, making sure that our heart's
Hmm.
pumping, all the things that keep us alive.
Hmm.
Those little pauses when you're reading or learning something, it's giving your brain, it's like powering down your brain a little bit so it
Yeah,
can absorb what I'm saying this in very layman's term. It gives your brain some time to power down
yeah.
and really embed what you're learning.
Thank you. I'll take your correction and definitely accept it. So technique rather than trick. Is technique a
Yeah.
better word? Yeah, yeah. Um,
And sorry, I feel like I'm being very pedantic. These things are things we have discovered through research, and it is the more we learn about their brain. So the reason I don't like to use that kind of language when we talk about things that are
hmm.
science-based is because it feels like it gets diminished.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and thanks for the correction. And no need to apologize for being pedantic, especially in this case. Yeah. So the science, the research backed technique of the 10-second close your eyes microbreak. Yeah, I've discovered that and find it really useful.
And also, while we're on the topic, because you
Yeah.
mentioned this, the breath is also a really important thing.
Hmm.
I remember when I first started doing Pilates and yoga, and they'd always say, make sure you're breathing. And in my
Hmm.
head, I'm like, if I wasn't, I'd be curled. But as I got into these types of exercises, and even actually when I was working with a running coach, they really talk about the importance of controlling your breath. And
Yeah.
but it was something that I really struggled with. Like, why do we talk about breath so much? Why do we talk about breath so much? But how you breathe and the pace of your breathing
Mhm.
affects how you could probably notice I took a deep breath and now my pace of talking has mellowed out a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when I speed up my talking, my breath is not as I'm taking shorter breaths because I can't talk fast and breathe
Yeah.
deeply at the same time. But it also signals to your nervous system. There's a physical reaction in your nervous system when you
Mm.
take those breaths. So this is why if you are doing public speaking and
Mm.
you get up on stage and you take a big breath,
Mm.
you're probably all tensed up. And then if you go up there,
Mhm.
and so going back to your polar bear, maybe the
Mm.
polar bear paused because
Mm.
it was really anxious. Maybe
Yeah.
the polar bear was underaged.
Ah, hadn't been in that bar before. Maybe they'd walked in the bar and the piano had stopped and everyone looked around. What? Who's this? It's a new bear in town. Yeah. So this is a nice meandering conversation, Danny. So that takes me to the mental image of public speaking and taking a pause before starting to breathe and center yourself. Speaking of not just the duration of the pause, but the timing of the pause, my mind went to there's a before pause, a during pause, and perhaps an after pause, if that makes sense. And it might not be that helpful to have a mighty pause during your public speaking engagement. You might not be asked back if you disappear for a couple of days and then, but you can definitely weave in micro pauses into a during and perhaps even a mini pause. And maybe each of those, as I'm thinking aloud and thinking about my experience, each of those, like the before, the during, and the after, actually serve slightly different purposes. Your before pause in the public speaking engagement here is your kind of centering and preparing to speak and to engage your audience. Maybe the micro pause is to could serve a couple of purposes. If you have a 10-second pause in the middle of your presentation, 10 seconds might feel like a long time, uh, but it's going to get your audience's attention back potentially, um, as you've just exhibited, not just described, but help you reset your pace and your tone. Maybe 10 seconds is actually too long, but a couple of seconds even. And then where my mind is also going to is at the end of your presentation, the micro or maybe mini pauses for me time for reflection. And I think that's where a lot of your learning comes in. If you pause and reflect and almost debrief yourself in that pause time, then you can understand and assess whether you performed your presentation in the way that you wanted to and think about the things you would do differently.
So what you're talking about here has so many applications, not just in public speaking.
Mm.
So definitely in public speaking situations, when you have made a point that you want to resonate with the audience, give it a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And I say minute
Mm.
colloquially, don't give it an actual minute, but pause, give it a
Yeah.
micro pause to let it sink in. If you're trying to have an impact with one of the, and everything you say cannot have the same level of impact, like the brain would just explode and your talk would not make any sense.
Mm.
But figure out what are those key things that you want people to walk away from.
Mm.
And as you say them at the end,
Mm.
micro pause
Mm-hmm.
to give the brain some time to process. But this also has other applications. So when you are giving feedback to somebody,
Mm-hmm.
because oftentimes and generally if the feedback is not good, we are very anxious to give the feedback. And what we tend to do is blah, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
and then we just keep talking, and the person's probably sitting there confused. So when we deliver something that someone may not want to hear but needs to hear, the micro pause is really important
Mm-hmm.
because it's making sure that person is registering what you're saying. In parenting situations, I am not a parent, but I've seen this happen where a parent will give direction or ask their child to do something, and there's no pausing to register. Have they understood?
Yes, you're a nice reminder. I am a parent to a 6-year-old, and one of the things learned early on is when a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old doesn't have the same cognitive processing speed as a 42-year-old, and therefore leaving big pauses between questions or requests or just sentences is actually really important. It was a challenging skill to learn, to remember to slow down and leave those pauses. And the reminder is that actually it's still required, even though it doesn't, because you're engaged in a conversation with somebody who appears to be operating at the same speed, sometimes a lot quicker, but not always. So yeah, pauses.
So I'm probably going to ruin child programming for you. If there's a TV show your child likes to watch or
Yeah,
something,
yeah.
pay attention because you'll notice that there are lots of micro pauses
Oh, okay.
in between the speakings.
The speakings. I will now pay attention to that. Okay, that's given me something else to look at, or to look out for in Bluey.
Yes, actually, blue is a good example. Really pay attention, and you'll start to notice that there
Yeah,
is this. And then when you start to notice, I know that lots of adults struggle with watching children's shows because they like to watch it over and over again.
yeah, yeah.
But now when you start noticing the pausing, it'll get even more annoying.
Okay.
But it's deliberate.
Yeah, yeah. I've not heard of Paul. I know that repetition is an element of children's programming because repetition for children's brains is really important. But thanks for, yeah, I will pay attention to the pausing.
Repetition, by the way, is just as important for adult brains. It
Oh, okay.
just not in the same degree as children's brains.
We have to go down that you mentioned. Tell me more about that.
Repetition is an important part of learning something.
Yeah, okay.
Think about something you learned how to do as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Something I am learning how to do as an adult. I am a terrible cook. I'm getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And repetition is a real big part of this. I have a couple of things that I'm learning how to cook,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sticking to a couple of things so that I can keep repeating it over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm getting to the point that I can make one of those things almost like by habit. Repetition helps build the
Okay.
habit or the ritual.
Yeah.
That's just as important for us. For example, when you go to exercise and the instructor goes, don't forget to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's repetition because we need to be reminded.
Oh, yeah. So the learning cycles. Nice. Okay. Thank you. So back on to pausing. Repetition of pauses is helpful. So micro, what other we talked about before, during, after micro pauses. Is sleep a form of pausing? Because you mentioned sleeping and the importance of sleep, which I understand. And
Mm. I feel like that's probably more of a philosophical question,
okay.
but I will say yes,
Hmm.
only because I know that when we sleep, some parts of our brains are hibernating,
Hmm.
which has all sorts of goodness for our bodies and minds. So
Hmm.
it is a type of pausing. I just don't recommend doing it in the context of work.
Okay.
Let me reframe that.
Yeah.
I am a big believer in napping. And I
Yeah.
think one of the ways that we could massively improve productivity in organizations is allowing people to take afternoon naps.
Yeah. I absolutely wholeheartedly agree. For a long time, probably as long as I've been working, I've always said if I ever ran the company, then every desk would have a roll-up sleep mat next to it, and you'd be able to roll out your sleeping mat onto your desk and have a micro power nap for 10 or 15 minutes
Yep.
a couple of times a day, and just the difference it would totally agree, the difference it would make.
A 20-minute nap
Mm,
could increase productivity because you wake up, and I've experienced this when I work from home. I'll have lunch, I'll have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and then I'll
mhm.
lay down for 20 minutes, and then I
Yeah,
wake up and my brain is just like it was when I woke up first thing in the morning, right? Like
yeah,
ready
yeah,
to go, get stuff done.
yeah,
So I feel like sacrificing that 20 minutes
Yeah.
is worth the productivity that I get. But
Yeah.
we don't live in a world where that kind of thinking is normalized. We think productivity is about go,
Yeah. Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
But the thing is, our brains aren't wired that way. So even if we look like we're going, the output and the actual productivity that's happening is
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
quality.
Diminishing it. Yeah, I think I've not experienced it firsthand, but I believe some Japanese businesses actively encourage part of, I think, Japanese culture that a desk nap is perfectly acceptable, if not actually encouraged, if not revered. If you're having a desk nap, then it's almost the opposite problem. It shows that you are working extremely hard because you need a desk nap. Yeah, all of this comes into, for me, one of my favorite phrases, although I do need to make sure it's understood, is rest is part of training.
Yeah.
And actually, I think of it in sporting terms, like an athlete who's training, let's say, for the Olympics. The most important part of their training schedule is the time that they're not training. Um, so for us as knowledge workers, as designers, some of the most important time is when we're not actually, let's say, on the tools or actively doing something. It's when we're doing the opposite of it. Maybe not. Sleeping is definitely, obviously, absolutely important. So important, critical to health and especially mental health. And as knowledge workers, our mental health is the equivalent of our muscles that a sprinter might need to develop and train. But yeah, this ties completely into what you were just saying about we're not built for continuous operation, and yet our work culture can sometimes lead us into that pitfall, that trap of thinking that in order to deliver something by a deadline, then we need to work every single spare minute and before that deadline, when actually not quite the opposite, but we definitely need to be building in pauses, whether they're micro, mini, or sometimes mighty.
A couple of weeks ago, I was working on something that was really data heavy and I was trying
Mhm.
to figure something out.
Mm.
And I remember getting to a point and I just need to walk away. And I did. I
Yeah,
literally just walked away. I went, started the laundry, did like just random things. And then I came back to it and I just saw it differently. And I started going down another route and then I hit another wall.
yeah,
And then I said, it worked last time. Let me go do something else. And in that second time, I didn't walk away. I just put that data work away and I went and did some email stuff and I did
yeah,
some other things. And then I came back to it. I'm using that as a specific example because you could look at it, oh my God, that was 2 hours you could have spent on it.
yeah,
But if it's 2 hours I'm spending on it and I'm not getting anywhere, is it
yeah,
actually 2 hours I'm spending on it?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So micro pauses are those in the moment, couple of seconds, take a breath. Pauses, mini pauses. I'm going to say about 10 to 15 minutes.
Hmm.
Walk away from something and go do something else and come back to it.
Hmm.
And the mighty pauses.
Yeah.
Mighty pauses are those longer and they tend to be more planned and deliberate
Mm.
and you're walking away from something for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where I see this going wrong
Hmm.
is oftentimes we plan to take mighty pauses and sneak in micro bits of work. That is a very modern day problem. And it's a modern day, and the reason I say it's a modern day problem is that when our society was predominantly working in a factory or a farm, or when our work was more hands-on,
Mm.
when you weren't on the farm or you weren't in the factory, you weren't really working because
Yeah.
it was physically impossible
Yeah.
to be working on the assembly line if you're not at the assembly line. So when we
Yeah.
left work, we truly left work.
Yeah.
It's a modern day problem because today we leave work and we
Mm.
take our devices with us,
Hmm.
or our devices are constantly speaking to us too.
Hmm.
So most of us fail at mighty pauses
Mm.
because, and then we come back and it's almost like you're in a, so you know how when you have a bad night's sleep
Mm.
and but you still stay in bed
Mm.
and then you wake up and it just you're not rested at all, even though you've been laying down all
Hmm.
night,
Hmm.
but you haven't slept. And research even says it's better to just get up if you can't sleep and
Yeah.
go do something else and come back to try to sleep.
Yeah.
When you go on vacation and you work, it's that same effect
Yeah.
because you haven't truly disengaged.
Yeah.
So you come back more tired because you haven't really done either of the things
Yeah.
that the holiday is supposed to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. You've taken a series of somewhere between mini and mighty breaks instead of taking an actual mighty break. Yeah, it's like you're coming back to what you mentioned about the nervous system. You're still in the wrong state, or you're never really properly in the paused, switched off, relaxed state where all the good stuff happens. And coming back to as knowledge workers compared to say farmer other workers back in the day, even if we leave our devices behind, then one of the challenges we have is that our work is a lot of it is literally in our minds. It's like where we're doing our work is in our heads. So it's not a good idea to leave that entirely behind in the workplaces that we're always carrying our work around in our mind. So we need to learn how to actively pause. Yeah, pause. Thank you. Which means the word I use is like switching off, isn't it? How do we switch off the part of our brain that is can continuously be thinking about work, whether that's problems, opportunities, exciting stuff, challenging stuff, boring stuff. I think pausing or learning to pause well is about learning to put those things to the side. Yeah,
Mm.
going to put you on the spot now and ask you what sort of things you do to do that, to put to work to one side or switch off the working part of your brain, whether it's in a mini or mighty duration.
Personally, and perhaps for a lot of other people, I think a mini pause
Mm,
is in lots of ways easier
mhm,
because you can say, look, I'm going to go for a walk and I'm going to come
mm.
back to it. And it's a specific span of time
Yeah,
that is acceptable. So if you said to your boss, hey, I'm going to walk away for 15 minutes, but I'll be back,
yeah,
there's this unsaid assumption they'll be okay with it. But then also for the person hearing it, oh, 15 minutes, that's
hmm,
whereas if I said, look, I'm going to take 15 days and I'm going to come back to this, it feels like I've got to sell it. You've got to get your head. So I think in lots of ways we struggle with the mighty break
yeah,
because it feels like it's not going to be accepted.
hmm,
It's going to be viewed as frivolous. And this is very cultural.
mm,
In the US, 2 weeks of vacation is the norm,
yeah,
whereas in New Zealand, it's 4 weeks.
mm,
And one of the big cultural shocks that I experienced coming to New Zealand is everybody takes their 4 weeks off
yeah,
and
yeah,
then some,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That is just the cultural norm.
hmm,
Whereas in the States, even taking the 2 weeks you're entitled to
mm,
feels like a big ask.
hmm,
I'm generalizing because I'm
mm,
pretty sure there's places and people in New Zealand that haven't taken a holiday in God knows how long. And I'm sure
yeah,
there's people in the US that take so I'm being very general, but the point I'm trying to make is that cultural and social norms also dictate
mm,
a mighty pause.
mm,
Whereas micro pause and mini pauses, we have a lot more control at an individual level to do.
yeah,
Micro pausing is a habitual self-conscious thing that you've got to learn how to do. The
hmm,
same thing with the mini pause, but I think most of us are naturally good at the mini pause because
mm,
it's just something you feel, right? You're working
hmm,
on something, I'm not getting anywhere with
mm,
this. And it's something that we don't feel like we have to ask permission for.
mm,
With the mighty pause, it's two levels. It's I need this break to be accepted by the people around me,
hmm,
and I've got to do the internal work to disconnect.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And that's why it's harder. So what I do when I need to, and I'm not saying I'm very good at this, I work for myself, so my personal and professional life bleed in all the
mm,
time.
mm,
But when I am being very deliberate about, you know what, an example, on my birthday, I booked in a spa day for myself.
hmm,
And my birthday happened to be on a Friday. And I made the mental decision on Thursday, I am going to park everything
hmm,
so that on Friday, I am not doing anything related to work.
yeah,
And what I did is on Thursday, at the end of the day, one, I set expectations. I am not available on Friday.
yeah,
And then I started making a list of all the things that were floating around in my head.
mm,
I made a list and said to myself, all right, this is everything I'm doing on Monday. There's power to that and some of the things that were on the list, I literally scheduled it in the calendar because
mm,
then I knew this isn't going to happen till Tuesday. So I don't need to be bothered with it. Or
Hmm.
there's this thing happening on Wednesday and I have to work on a presentation when I get back on Monday. So I'll put that in the calendar for Monday. So really thinking about what are the things that are floating around in your head and how do you get it out into, this is a bit of visual communication happening with yourself.
Hmm.
How do you get it out onto the paper and then how do you get it scheduled or whatever format you use so that it's not taking up real estate in your brain?
Yeah, yeah. You're giving your brain a chance to actually switch off and pause.
But
Yeah,
I will
nice.
say it's not easy to do. I struggle with it. I have a method for it,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to be very deliberate about it and very disciplined about it. This is the other thing.
Yeah,
Taking deliberate breaks takes discipline, which sounds a
yeah,
bit counterintuitive,
yeah,
but it takes a lot of mental discipline to disengage.
yeah. Oh, yes, that's a great point. Yeah, it's almost paradoxical, isn't it? You think pausing is breaking, as in having a break, so it must therefore be easy. But actually, you're right. It takes a lot of, or can take a lot of effort, work, and yeah, discipline, especially to set yourself up for the pause. That we're talking more mini and mighty rather than micro, right? But even the micro breaks needs discipline to build the habit to then do it habitually. Yeah, thanks for sharing your story there. Because yeah, the struggle can often be harder within than without, right? It's sometimes easier to line up a break with your stakeholders or your clients or your boss than it is actually to line up and be comfortable with it internally. Just as you're saying. Yeah. As we're talking, Danny, I'm wondering whether there's maybe there's a fourth level of break somewhere between mini and maybe it's because I've used the word mighty and there's a because like I'm thinking, yes, 15 days is takes a lot of effort to set up and get comfortable with, etc. But we have, if you work 9 to 5 Monday to Friday or 9 to 5 ish Monday to Friday ish, then society gives us a couple of days where we get to have a pause, don't we? Like a weekend. Most people it's Saturday and Sunday. And yeah, some of us do end up doing a little bit of work on the weekend sometimes, whether you work for yourself or work for somewhere else, but they are pauses built in for us. I think it's important to make the most of those. And that's where I was thinking that be great if a weekend could be a mighty pause, but often it's not. It's more like somewhere between the mini and the mighty, isn't it?
Why can't a weekend be a mighty pause?
Oh, good question. Good comeback. How might we make our weekends mighty pauses?
Here's an example of that. So remember
Yeah,
how I said for my birthday,
yeah,
which happened to be on a Friday, on Thursday, the week before I started setting expectations on Friday, the
hmm
14th, I will not be available.
hmm
If you need anything from me, please get it to me. I will not be available. So I started setting those expectations. So I did all this. I went through a checklist of I'm going to let everybody know. I'm going to set expectations. I'm going to set my out of office. I'm going to make the list. I'm going to schedule things in the calendar. What if we did that every Friday
hmm
and literally turned off our machine and we did things on the weekends? Go for a walk, go for a swim, go watch the ocean,
Yeah,
make
yeah.
breakfast that you ruin, and then go out to brunch.
I love your challenge to my thinking that yeah, maybe the secret is that you make your weekends as mighty a pause as you possibly can in whatever way that works for you, which could be maybe it's as simple as do anything but whatever your work is, whatever you're doing for a living, do anything but that.
We have to be practical. All
Hmm.
of us go through times when we are busy, and sometimes our work creeps into the weekend.
Yeah.
That is a norm of working life.
Hmm.
Where it gets to be a problem is that the working the weekends, the working the nights, that becomes the norm, and then you're not getting
Yeah, yeah,
any pausing.
yeah. And ultimately, if that continues for a duration of time, then you get into burnout territory where you'll need a lot more than a mighty pause to recover from that. So
Taking this back to the Olympics,
yeah.
those athletes during competitions, that's like when knowledge workers work overtime or in the weekends, right?
Yeah,
Because it's a
yeah,
busy time, we're trying to get something done.
yeah,
When those athletes are done competing, they
mm,
get time to recover.
yeah,
They
Yeah.
don't just go on to the next competition.
Yeah.
So why is it that we don't expect that from knowledge workers? Because, and that's where burnout happens. Humans are extremely, we can do endurance,
Yeah.
right? And I use the example of the last couple of months of my PhD research
Hmm.
was mentally exhausting. And I was not a pretty person to be around. I was in the data, I was trying to make sense of it, I was writing. It was just such a mentally exhausting time.
Hmm.
And when I finished and I defended and I got the yay, I literally sat on the couch and binge watched the trashiest Netflix shows I could. Because I knew had I gone from all of that to work, I was in burnout territory, but I needed the break to recover. And I think we'd look down upon the breaks.
Hmm.
And we don't go, actually, this person's done this amazing thing. Now they're in recovery mode. So let's leave them alone for a bit.
Yeah, they're in recovery mode. Let's leave them alone because if we do that, we know that they'll actually come back even stronger and better than they were before.
Hmm.
Um,
If you want people to go faster, you've got to let them take breaks.
yeah. Nice. Mic drop.
Well, on that,
Yeah, maybe it is on that. An author whose work is bubbling through my mind as we're having this conversation, Cal Newport. He's written several books that talk more expansively about this subject. But I think in order, like let's call it a mighty pause over the weekend, I think lining yourself up to switch off for the weekend is really important. And one of Cal Newport's techniques he uses, and he apparently still does it to this day. He learned it when he was a student, physically closing the lid of his laptop at the end of his workday and saying to himself out loud something like scheduled shutdown complete. Now, he's a computer scientist, so that's why he uses that language, but he's sending really strong signals, both physical and verbal, to himself that he will not reopen his laptop. And I think he describes that by doing that, he also tells his brain to just not think about work stuff. Once he's done that, whatever time of day he does that, I think learning your own version of that technique to stand up and walk away from work so that you can have a break in the evening or weekends is something that I've learned to do really helpful, especially in a post-COVID pandemic world where for a lot of us, flexible working and working from somewhere other than an office where you need to actually build in those physical, verbal, etc. cues to yourself, even though work might be, or potential work might be a matter of meters away or in a slightly different room in the house, then it's actually would be easy to keep going with work, but it's more important to pause.
but that's also where the flexibility comes in because there
Mm,
might be some pockets of your working life where you do need to let your work bleed into
mm,
those times.
mhm. Yeah,
That just can't be the norm.
yeah, exactly. Sorry, I maybe took away, I diminished from your mic drop peak moment there. But imagine I hadn't talked about Cal Newport, even though that was important for me to say. Mic drop moment. If you want people to go fast, you need to not let them take breaks. If we want to go fast ourselves, we need to give ourselves permission to take breaks.
We have to look at we have to look at breaks, rest, pauses, whatever we want to call them, as equally important.
Yes, another mic drop moment. I'm not going to ruin that one.
Let's have a micropause to let that sink
Mhm.
in.
Equally important. Yes. Yes, thank you for those words because that when I say rest is part of training, that's essentially what I'm trying to say is it is a vital, just as important part of performance.
And again, something I struggle with. It's a
Hmm.
work in progress for me.
Hmm.
So I'm not claiming to be some sort of guru on the topic because it's something I wrestle with too. The thing to remember is that we're probably never going to be perfect at it, but it's being conscious about when do I need a micro, mini, mighty
Yeah.
pause so that I can be okay. I can be more
Yeah.
effective. I can be more impactful, right?
Yeah.
So, this being a show about design and design
Hmm.
thinking
Hmm.
specifically, what does micro, mini, mighty have to do with design thinking?
Heaps. You just build those type of pauses into the workflow. I think you might have a mighty pause between pieces of work or projects. You might even have a couple of a mighty pause in between stages of work. You might have a mighty pause partway through a design sprint. Yeah.
Can
Mhm.
we create design sprints around breaks? I
Yeah,
find in New Zealand we have year-round schooling. So what is it, like 10 weeks on and 2 weeks off,
that's right.
right?
Until summer when it's 6 weeks. But
Yeah.
yeah.
But in the US, you have school that goes from basically you have school all year except summer.
Hmm.
And I find this interesting because there's lots of research that says that that amount of time away from school, the children regress. So it's better to have these pockets of time off throughout the year.
Hmm.
And it's understood that children need that, but it's not understood that adults need that. So that's one point. So then when we think about designing our work, why is it that we can't design our work where lots of organizations now work in 2 weekly sprints?
Yeah.
So why can't we design our work so you have a sprint and before going on to the next sprint,
Mm.
you have a break? Maybe it's
Yeah.
you work the 2 sprints and then you get that Friday off and then
Yeah.
so everybody gets a 3-day week. It doesn't have to be massive,
Yeah.
but why can't we organize our work that way?
Yeah. I have worked in an organization that did work in that way a little bit, and that was extremely effective to have a pause of a day between not every single sprint, but several sprints linked together. Then there was a pause. And coming back to part of our earlier conversation, a pause can be just doing something different rather than doing nothing at all. So you might sprint and then pause for a day and do something like in this situation, it was all the people who had a similar kind of expertise in a practice. For example, all the designers had a practice day, so we'd get together and spend time with each other and talk about design and how we might get better at that. And that was, I think, an effective pause to switch off from one mode of work, kind of reset and recharge, reconnect. I'm an advocate of doing that for sure. I think it's almost more essential to do it when you're working in that kind of sprint type
Mm.
pattern than it would be if you were working in a different way where week to week it's more or less the same.
Think about it, right? Like when you're working in that sprint time, and imagine telling a marathon runner who ran a race today, all
Yeah,
right, great job. By the way, you've got to go out and run another one tomorrow.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh, and by the way, after that, the next day you've got one too.
yeah, yeah. But if we're talking in athletics terms, by definition, a sprint needs a break at the end after it. You can't just keep sprinting and sprinting. And sprinters especially, their training regime is after a 100-meter sprint, they'll go to bed. They'll go and actually sleep for several hours before they're ready to do anything else.
So coming back to the design
Yeah,
process, I
sorry.
think we can build in mighty pauses
Yeah,
in between the big things.
yeah,
I also think when we design things like workshops,
mm,
we have to be more deliberate. I feel like we get people into rooms and we're like, okay, we're gonna ideate, and then we're gonna move to
yeah,
this, and we're gonna move to that.
yeah,
By the way, putting speed into ideation is a good thing because
yeah,
there's lots of benefits into that.
yeah, yeah,
That's not what I'm talking about. It's
yeah,
the transitioning, being deliberate about, okay, we've done some ideation, which was a rapid moving task.
yeah,
Let's do something that's more slow paced. Let's give
yeah,
people a chance to just chit chat
yeah,
and then move to the next thing.
yeah,
We could be very deliberate about how do we design workshops, learning, and anything, even a meeting.
yeah,
How do we design a meeting so that it's not an hour of bing, bing, bing?
yeah, yeah. Yes, actually, the most effective, enjoyable workshops or sprints that I've been part of, we have designed those changes of state quite deliberately from, and actually, if you talk about a meeting being an hour long, I think a more effective, enjoyable meeting is one that has the right balance of fast and slow pace. And that's in contrast to either an hour of really slow paced activity, which wouldn't make sense, or an hour of really fast activity, which would just drive everyone crazy. But the mixture of those two, I think, is actually more effective and enjoyable than like a medium paced hour long meeting that doesn't have that change of state, maybe getting philosophical. It's like the pause and the speed are necessary for each other, light and dark.
Mm.
You don't know one without the other. You need to have that contrast in pace.
Design is all about balance too, right? So
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is what we're talking about is It can't just be go, it's got to be other
Yeah.
things as well.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on how do we as design thinkers bring pauses into our work?
Yeah, I think the opportunities are all over the place, aren't they? It's maybe not how, but just to remind, as in our parts of our earlier conversation, it's more maybe we as design thinkers, and if we're, let's say, facilitating a group of fellow designers or non-designers, I think it's part of our job is to pay attention to this and be the person, at least the one person before others join us. And I think of it as standing up to the default, because that default kind of urge or the feeling we get that we need to be moving at a high pace all the time because we are the design thinker, we are the leader, we're the facilitator. We need to be the person that takes almost a brave point of view and goes, no, we're actually going to have a micro, mini, or mighty pause on this because we know for sure that it's going to actually benefit the outcomes of the work in the end. I remember just starting off with design sprints that were 5 days long. It didn't take us long to realize that actually the fifth day was pretty much a waste of time. So a 4-day design sprint turned out to be a lot more effective than a 5-day design sprint. And also we learned that you couldn't do two of those back to back with the same facilitation team. You needed to have a week off at least between a 4-day design sprint and the next one. So that was the how. What about our favorite subject, Annie, our design thinking capabilities? How do these come into play when we're talking about pauses and the power of the pause?
Oh, let's see. We usually start with situation optimizing,
Yeah.
which is about looking at situations and having that belief that better is possible. It's about understanding constraints and still maintaining the attitude that change is possible.
Mhm.
When we're using that muscle, it requires a lot of reflection. There, both micro and mini pauses are very critical.
Mhm.
So oftentimes when I'm doing workshops or even interviews where I ask people, so tell me all the things that don't work. Tell me what's not working well today. As they get to the end of that list, I try to build in some conversation before I move into the next thing.
Mhm.
Because it's really hard to tell somebody to tell me all the bad things, not tell me all the good things. Like
Mhm.
that it just doesn't flow.
Yeah.
So one of the ways you could build in a little micro pause is switch to something else,
Mhm.
like just finding some way to make that transition,
Mhm.
which means that that conversation might take a little bit longer, but it's going to be more effective.
Yeah.
And also, particularly around understanding what's not working, that's also a good opportunity for a mini break to go, great. That's especially if you're doing that in a workshop setting.
Mhm.
Let's go take a break, grab a coffee, bio break, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
and come back to it.
Yeah. I think for me, situation optimizing, yeah, it's believing in the power of the pause and adopting a situation optimization mindset means that, yeah, you should be looking for ways to build in breaks to any kind of work. I'm not explaining that particularly well, but it's like they go hand in hand. It's maybe it's a way to optimize almost any situation is find the ways to build in that contrast between going fast and pausing for all the reasons we've just described.
So the next one with empathetic exploration, I think micro pauses here are really critical, particularly when you are having interviews or trying to do that empathy work. As much as we could prepare to go do to empathize with people, what we find out, and this is what fascinates me about a researcher, because as a researcher, you're taught you've got to have a research plan, you've got to have a script, you've got to have this, you've got to have that, and then you show up and the environment, things that you're not expecting show pops up all the time.
Mhm.
And you have to be able to pivot in the moment, still remember what you intended to do, the outcome you're looking for, but improvise and pivot.
Mhm.
That improvising and pivoting requires a lot of micro and mini pauses. So I've been in situations where I've been out in communities and I was going to do the research this way, but then I showed up and, okay, this is not going to work in this context. Or I came here to talk about this, but clearly this community is upset about this. So I've got to let them talk about the thing that they want to talk about.
Yeah.
but I need that micro moment to sense what's happening and readjust.
Yeah.
So I think that's how pausing plays a role in this.
Yeah, nice. What else have we got?
So visual communication, I think we talked about that in terms of, I think visual communication can actually help us with pausing because we can take all the things in our heads. Sometimes when I feel like there's a lot in my head, I literally get out the post-it notes and write thoughts down. I put it on the wall, and it just helps me get some distance and a bit of pausing and going.
Yeah, yeah.
And I talked about the list making before as well. That's how I organize my brain to be able to take a break.
Yeah, nice. I think another one is, I guess, what was coming to mind there was the curious experimentation, because, and it's almost combined with empathetic exploration, but about ourselves. Much like a different athlete, every different athlete will need a slightly different training regime with a different mix of work and rest. I think we, and also the specific teams that we become part of and start working with, each of those individuals and us, we need a slightly different mix. So it's like being empathetically exploring with ourselves to begin with, and with others, like what is the right blend of break in order to make things most effective and enjoyable, get the best outcomes. And that requires us to experiment curiously, right? We need to get into trying out what these different types of pause are and when to take them, and being open to sometimes we'll get it wrong one way or the other. Take too big a break or too short a break.
This visual communication in the calendar, like calendars can really help
Yeah.
us
Yeah.
visually putting in.
Yeah.
So I've been doing lately is like when I need to do deep focus work, I put it in my calendar and call it deep focus work.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And I don't know why, but it's like mentally, then my brain goes up, yep, this is the time to do this.
Yeah. It's sending a signal to you, but also if anybody else can see your calendar, they're going, oh, Danny's not available. Yeah. And that is a recurring theme in our conversation, isn't it? We need to be just as conscious of the signals we're sending to ourselves as the signals we are communicating to other people around, having breaks, taking pauses, making them. And maybe that's a better word. Like we need to make these things happen, and make sure that we are communicating healthily to ourselves and to each other about them.
So we did situation optimizing, empathetic exploration, visual communication, idea generation. With idea generation, when you're asking people to move into an ideation space, you do need to create a bit of separation from your normal existence to ideation. And we can do that with a micro or a mini pause. Research shows if you want people to come with good ideas, send them out for a walk for 15 minutes and then bring them into the room. So there's ways that we can build in mini pausing to be more effective with ideation.
Definitely. I mean, that relates totally to the classic, you get your best ideas in the shower. It's because your brain is not actively seeking an answer. It is paused, and not magically, because it's not magic. It's neurology means that the idea emerges. Yeah, so actually for better idea generation, build in pauses to the work.
Yeah. So maybe it is that you bring everybody into the room and you say, look, we're going to be ideating on XYZ. But before we do that,
Yeah.
let's go all take a little walk outside,
Yeah.
10
Yeah.
minutes and come back.
Yeah. Yes, you're priming and then having a break and then coming back. Yeah.
So
Yes.
collective collaboration. How might we use pausing?
There's a few different ideas come to mind. What one is actually, if you're collaborating well, then maybe you can take turns to take a pause individually. And if you're effectively collaborating, you can walk away from a group knowing and trusting that the work will continue. And when you come back, you will still be able to contribute in a powerful way. And also, you'll be giving someone else a chance to take a break. And the other idea that came to mind is taking a break as a group. Having a meal together with a group that you're collaborating with is incredibly powerful. And that's a great example, I think, of an active pause where you are still with each other and talking, and probably end up talking about work situations over a meal, but because you're not actively working on the problem or the design challenge, then something different happens and it does feel like a powerful pause.
I also wonder if there's an opportunity when we are collaborating with others, particularly if you are an individual that tends to be very talkative,
Hmm.
micro pausing could be
Hmm.
effective.
Hmm. Yeah.
Now, every time you tend to want to speak, maybe tell yourself, hang on.
Yeah. As our friend Robert Van Winkle, the third junior, would say, stop, collaborate, and listen.
Which is something that, and this is why collaboration is so screwed, is a big part of collaboration is actually pausing and listening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Curious experimentation.
Well, I think this is where, yeah, we acknowledge that we need to figure out what is the right mix of micro, mini, mighty before, during, and after pauses for us, that the work for us as individuals, and then the work for the group and the particular piece of work. Because I think it requires curious experimentation because the answer, the right blend will differ from
Mm.
situation to situation, group to group.
I have a little bit of a story around this.
Oh, yeah.
Some time ago, in an organization I was working on, we had gone through the ideation process and we'd come up with an idea and we wanted to try it.
Mhm.
And so we took it to the team that was going to trial it. And the agreement was we were going to run it for a set amount of days and see what happens. And there were metrics we were going to run. And I started every day. How's the experiment going? How's the experiment going? And I got told, you need to not do that. We agreed to this many days, leave it alone
Mhm.
and check in with us. It was almost like the team was saying, like, let us do it.
Mhm.
And that was a good lesson for me in pausing because it was like my brain couldn't turn off the fact that this experiment was going on. So I kept wanting to engage, but I
Mhm.
didn't need to engage.
Yeah, yeah.
And particularly if you're a leader, this is important
Mhm.
because if you've asked your team to go do something and you've
Mhm.
agreed in a week and whatever, leave them alone. So I
Yeah,
think there is that, and there's lots of things. What do they say? A watched kettle doesn't boil or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think there's lots of applications to this. Sometimes I think we have to do our part
Mhm.
and then go take a break and then come back to it and see what's happened. Don't be watching over the shoulder and because you don't need to be. And I
Yeah,
think those are opportunities where we can actually go, actually, I've done my part. I don't need to check on this for 30 days. I'll go do
yeah,
something. I'll go take a break.
yeah. Nice. Yeah, that rings true for me. Just, yeah, tell yourself to have a micro or mini break when you find yourself getting curious or wanting to find out how something's going.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
nice. Thanks, Dani. I think that covers all of the capabilities. Good to come back to those always. And yeah, we've had a good wide-ranging chat about the power of the pause.
We have. And we even managed to take the polar bear on the journey.
Yes, that pint that the barman served the polar bear has been sitting nicely, settling on it. Maybe it was a Guinness, actually. I think that would be a polar bear's favorite because that does require a nice long pause between pouring and drinking for it to settle. That pint of Guinness is ready for the polar bear to enjoy now.
Guinness seems like appropriate for a polar bear's natural climate.
Yeah, yeah,
All
nice and cold.
right, what are you taking away?
Oh, apart from a sudden desire for a pint of Guinness, what am I taking away? I like this combination that I've never thought about before, so thank you about this. The micro, the mini, the mighty, but then putting it into a 3x3 grid with before, during, and after, and then
Mhm.
using that as a bit of a template to go, okay, so the situation I'm about to step into, this piece of work, for example, I'm just thinking hypothetically, let me plan ahead to and think to myself, how might I and also how might I lead the group to be really deliberate about these three categories of break in these three particular stages of the work, whatever that is. Yeah, that's what I'm taking away.
You asked me earlier about is sleep a type of pause?
Oh yeah.
So I wrote down a question around is sleep a pause? Because
Uh-huh.
instinctually I want to say it is a type of a pause, but
Mm.
then we had also talked about this idea of active and inactive pauses.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So now my takeaway is I want to go dive into that a little bit.
Okay. Cool. I look forward to hearing where you get with that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've been wanting to
nice.
read that book, Why We Sleep, so maybe this will be my
Oh,
chance to get that book.
okay. Feel free to use me as your excuse to buy another book, Danny.
I always do.
Yeah, yeah, nice.
Cool. This has been great, Pete.
Yeah, it certainly has.
Thanks for listening, listeners.
Thank you, everyone. I hope this has been a helpful pause for you, wherever you're listening, whatever you've been doing in before and after listening to our podcast.
Yes, so go take a pause.
Yeah,
See you next time.
see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Danny.
Thanks, Pete. Bye.
Bye.